Until he returns. Chapter 1. The sound of Ron's footsteps fading into the forest vanished as quickly as the last bit of hope lingering in the air. Then, only the cold wind rustling the leaves remained, and the campfire burning with a heat that couldn't reach the chill they felt inside. Hermione sat in a corner of the tent, knees pulled to her chest, face hidden in her arms. She wasn't sobbing, but her breathing was uneven and broken. Harry watched her from his makeshift cot, words stuck in his throat. He wanted to say something. Anything. That everything would be fine, that Ron would be back by dawn, that they could still go on without him. But none of that sounded believable. And he knew it. She knew it too. Hermione hadn't lifted her head. She hadn't said a word since Ron crossed the barrier of protective spells. She had only curled further into herself, as if trying to disappear inside her own body. Harry got up awkwardly, but he didn't approach her. He didn't feel capable, because he too had a knot in his stomach. He too wanted to scream, punch something, chase after Ron and force him to stay, but he was paralyzed, and he hated it. Hours passed without a word. The fire died out on its own. Hermione's magical watch marked midnight, then 1, then 2. She hadn't moved from her spot. Harry watched her now and then. She wasn't sleeping. She wasn't crying either. She was just there. And he, sitting against the tent's central pole, eyes open the whole time, waited, as if at any moment Ron would return, soaked, regretful, apologizing. But he didn't return, and so, in silence and exhaustion, they stayed awake through the night. Not as heroes, not even as strong friends, but as two scared teenagers, alone in the woods, waiting for something that might never come back. The morning light crept timidly through the seams of the tent, casting golden lines over the blankets and damp ground. For a moment, Harry thought he had dreamed it all, that Ron hadn't left, that the fight had just been the product of exhaustion. Maybe, if he opened his eyes, he'd see him there, snoring with his mouth open, like always. But no. When he sat up, he felt the emptiness. The kind that reality leaves when you wish too hard that it isn't real. Hermione was still asleep, lying on her side, eyelids puffy and face pale. At some point in the early morning, she had given in to exhaustion, defeated by a sleepless night neither of them remembered ending. Harry rubbed his eyes. His body ached, and his mind wasn't doing much better. Before long, Hermione awoke, blinking slowly. For a second, she remained still, as if she too hoped nothing had happened. But as she looked around, she knew. The silence wasn't the same without Ron. "Nothing?" she asked, her voice hoarse, without needing to clarify what she meant. Harry shook his head. No further questions came. Breakfast was meager, a couple of dry biscuits and some warm water. They ate in silence, sharing only brief glances that said more than any attempt at conversation. Then came the inevitable. "We have to move," Harry said quietly, a knot in his stomach. Hermione nodded. Her wand trembled slightly in her fingers as she began undoing the protective enchantments around the campsite. Packing the tent, gathering their things, reviewing the maps. Everything moved slower than usual, as if every action was a silent farewell to the hope still lingering. From time to time, they glanced toward the edge of the forest, as if Ron might suddenly appear with his backpack, angry but remorseful, but he didn't. In the end, the clearing was left empty, as if they had never been there. Only faint footprints in the mud remained, and the silence of a forest that knew nothing of broken hearts. Harry and Hermione set off again, wordless, with no clear destination. The distance between them wasn't from a lack of affection, but from too much pain. They had walked for hours, following barely visible paths among gray trees and damp branches. They didn't speak. The silence had become an uncomfortable constant, like an invisible third presence heavier than any backpack. But Harry couldn't take it anymore. The buzzing in his head, the tension between them, the not knowing if Hermione was about to break down or give up, it all burned inside him. Finally, in a clearing surrounded by mossy rocks, he dropped his bag and stopped cold. "Hermione," he began without turning around, "I can't keep pretending this isn't tearing you apart." She stopped too, a few steps behind. She didn't answer, but he could feel her attention on his back. "I want to apologize," he continued, turning to face her with a serious expression, tired eyes, "for not being able to stop him from leaving, for not being able to stop all of this, for not having answers, and for dragging you into this." Hermione frowned slightly but said nothing. "If you want to leave, I'll understand," Harry added, a lump in his throat. "You don't have to stay. You don't have to endure this alone with me. You've already lost Ron. I don't want you to lose anything else because of me." Hermione placed her bag on the ground calmly and looked up at him. Her eyes weren't teary or broken. They were steady, tired, yes, but full of fire. "Harry James Potter," she said clearly. "Do you really think I'm here out of obligation?" He blinked, surprised by her tone. "I'm here because I want to be," she continued, "because if Voldemort wins, I'll never see my parents again, because my life as I know it will be over. But more than that, I'm here because you're my friend, and I would never betray you." Harry opened his mouth but couldn't find words. Hermione took a step toward him, then another. "This isn't just your mission, it's ours. It's all or nothing, do you understand? I'm not here to turn my back on you when things get hard, I'm here to stay." They stared at each other for a long moment, only that truth hanging between them like a barrier stronger than any spell. Harry nodded slowly. "Thank you," he murmured. Hermione picked up her backpack without another word. "Let's go," she said. "We still have work to do." And so, together, they walked back into the forest. This time not as two broken pieces walking in parallel, but as a team, made weaker by loss, but stronger in unity. Chapter 2. Darkness fell over the forest like a heavy shroud, wrapping the trees in thick, icy shadows. Harry and Hermione had found a small clearing where they set up the tent once more. The silence between them was dense, but different from the night before, more resigned, less sharp, like a wound beginning to close even though it still hurt. Hermione flipped idly through the Tales of Beedle the Bard, her gaze drifting beyond the pages. She wasn't really reading, just seeking the comfort of words, even if they said nothing new. Meanwhile, Harry had been rummaging through the supplies without a word. After a few minutes, the faint fragrance of coffee began to mix with the cold night air. Hermione looked up, surprised. "Coffee?" she asked, barely louder than a whisper. Harry nodded and handed her a steaming cup. "I thought you could use something warm," he said simply. Hermione accepted it, her expression somewhere between surprise and gratitude. It wasn't like Harry to offer such gestures, especially unprompted. "Thank you," she murmured, with a small smile that didn't erase the exhaustion but softened it slightly. "I'll take watch tonight," Harry added, sitting near the tent's entrance with his wand in hand. Hermione opened her mouth, maybe to protest, but seeing the calm resolve in his face, she simply nodded. "Wake me if you need a break," she said, pulling the blanket over her shoulders. "I will," Harry lied, already knowing he wouldn't. Several quiet minutes passed, but this time, the silence wasn't uncomfortable, just calm. Hermione sipped her coffee slowly, and though she still missed Ron, a quiet warmth began to settle inside her. Harry said nothing else. He just sat there, watching the night. Dawn had not yet broken when Harry stood up, careful not to make a sound. Hermione was sleeping deeply for the first time in days, wrapped in her blanket, her brow far less furrowed than usual. Driven by something he couldn't quite name, maybe gratitude, maybe a need to do more than just survive, he took his wand and slipped out of the tent. The forest was still dark and damp, but the nearby murmur of a stream sparked an idea. It took him longer than he'd hoped. Fishing without magic was an art he'd never truly learned, but after several tries, soaked and frustrated, he managed to catch a decently sized fish. When he returned to camp, Hermione was already awake, stepping out of the tent and rubbing her eyes. She stopped when she saw Harry crouched by the fire, stoking the flames as the fish began to sizzle on a makeshift grill. "You did that?" she asked, surprised. Harry shrugged without looking at her. "I thought you deserved something better than dry biscuits for once, and I wanted to thank you." Hermione didn't reply right away. She just watched him silently, her heart tightening with a strange, quiet warmth. No boy had ever treated her like this before. Not with sweet words, but with simple actions that spoke far more. And yet, Harry, with all his fears and doubts, had gone out into the dark just to make her breakfast. She sat near him, crossing her legs carefully, and took the plate when he handed it to her. "Thank you, Harry," she said softly. He only nodded and started eating too, not saying much more. That night, the forest fell into shadows again, thick and still. After the early morning effort, the improvised breakfast, and the wandering walk through the woods, exhaustion finally caught up with Harry. As soon as he lay down on his blanket, his eyelids began to fall. Hermione, sitting in her usual corner with her book, watched him as his breathing slowly deepened. For once, he didn't insist on keeping watch. He didn't pretend he could push through. He just slept. Hermione smiled gently. It had been a strange day, full of silences that spoke louder than words, and small gestures that weighed like great decisions. She never would have expected such care or warmth from Harry, and yet he'd given it freely. Quietly, she stepped closer with light steps, and took the extra blanket from nearby. She laid it over him with care, as if he were fragile, as if this small act could protect him from everything weighing on his shoulders. She stood there for a moment, watching him sleep, finally relaxed, no constant tension in his muscles, no furrowed brow, just a boy, exhausted by the weight of the world, the war, and the loss. "Rest, Harry," she whispered. Then, with a quiet resolve, she took a seat by the entrance of the tent, wand in hand. This time, the watch would be hers, not out of duty, not out of guilt, but because she wanted to. Because after everything he had silently given her today, the least she could offer in return was one peaceful night of sleep without fear. The characters and universe of Harry Potter belong to J.K. Rowling and their respective rights holders. This story is a work of fiction written by a fan, with no official connection to the creators of the original material. Thank you for supporting fan-made content.